I wanted to talk about proper punctuation in California legislation because there are some rules of punctuation when drafting legislation. Now, as a general rule, the answer is there aren't official rules of punctuation because general rules of English grammar, including punctuation, usually apply to legislative drafting. However, there are some instances when some special rules should be applied, including things like capitalization. So I wanted to discuss a few of the rules for purposes of drafting California legislation. Now, neither the California Constitution nor any California statute actually deals with punctuation for purposes of drafting legislation or even for interpreting a law in the state of California. On the other hand, there are a number of states that have laws concerning the weight to be given punctuation in statutory interpretation. I've looked at some laws in Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and Texas. And these three states have the same provision in their code. It says, in no case shall the punctuation of a law control or affect the intention of the legislature in the enactment thereof. Now, judges on occasion can use punctuation to support their construction of a particular statute. Other judges, of course, have disregarded punctuation because the legislative sentence may already provide a better indication of the statute's intended meaning. Proper punctuation helps the reader make his or her way through the statutory language and obviously helps facilitate a proper understanding of the language. Now, do legislative drafters use punctuation in a different manner than other legal writers? In most jurisdictions, there are no special rules of punctuation for drafting legislation. Proper legislative drafting requires punctuation to follow general standards for all legal writing. Of course, there are some rules related to punctuation. For example, certain punctuation marks such as question marks or exclamation points are not used in drafting statutes. Now, in reviewing some of the materials in the Graduate Diploma for Legislative Drafting courses at Athabasca University in Alberta, Canada, they offer a number of points related to punctuation in legislation. For example, they say that drafters should apply standard rules of punctuation as a means to clarify sentence structure and the sentence's component parts. In addition, bill drafters should only use punctuation when it serves an identifiable purpose, because unnecessary and excessive punctuation are viewed as an obstruction to communicating and understanding the statute. So what might some examples be? Well, a colon should be used at the end of a phrase in order to introduce a series of propositions, like an introduction. A phrase that ends with as follows, or a series of subsections or numbered items should be set off by a colon. A semicolon should be used within a legislative sentence in order to separate text that deals with closely related but distinct text. However, many legislative drafters prefer to use a conjunction rather than a semicolon. When it comes to the comma, Athabasca University's program calls it the most difficult and misused punctuation mark. Its effect is to cause the reader to pause. As a general rule, the comma should be used at the end of a complete clause, or a self-contained phrase, or a legislative sentence. The comma is often used after an introductory phrase in order to divide a component sentence, to separate items in a series, a list of items, or to help facilitate understanding, such as indicating completion of a phrase in a long sentence. Now, quotation marks are most often used when defining a term in a legislative sentence. In terms of an apostrophe, that punctuation mark is most often used with contracted words. However, contractions are not used in legislative drafting. Now, on occasion, the apostrophe might be found in a legislative sentence when possession is shown, such as an insured's vehicle. Nonetheless, legislative drafters try not to use them very often, instead choosing to use of the, such as the vehicle of the insured. Turning to the capitalization of letters, the use of uppercase letters generally follows the standard rules of grammar. For example, the first word of every sentence is capitalized, and the days of the week and the months of the year are capitalized. For legislative drafting, there are some rules to be aware of, such as capitalizing words that refer to specific legislation, such as act, part, the bill's short title, etc. In many instances, legislative terms such as clause, paragraph, or section are not capitalized. Also, words that describe a general class begin with a lowercase letter, such as directors, officers, judges, employees. So while many standards of English grammar are applicable to other forms of writing, sometimes they're applicable to legislative drafting as well. Nonetheless, there are several unique rules that legislative drafters need to be aware of when writing sentences in legislation. In many jurisdictions, there are actually style manuals or other directives on that state's preferred use of punctuation in drafting legislation.